15-year friend of my father's. Steve was chosen by Coach Wooden to be the author of a lot of his best-selling books. And as my dad conveyed it at the time, Coach Wooden was very thoughtful about having the right author that he wanted to work with on, especially taking a lot of his learnings and what I'd say, converting them into leadership lessons that could be applied in life. And even I, as an IBM professional, certainly got exposed through, to John Wooden and his leadership principles, even in the IBM and corporate business world. And what I really loved is the collaboration around some of the children's titles. And even Paige Powers, who is our host here on the call, my daughter, has one or two of those books sitting in her home or in her bedroom at home. So without further ado, Steve's been kind enough over the last 15 years to just befriend my dad and multiple interactions, and dear friend. And he's been kind enough to say a couple of words about his relationship with my dad and how it really kind of played out being a wooden boy, if you will. So Steve, thank you.
Thank you. I didn't befriend your dad. He befriended me, and I am eternally grateful that he let me in his home, helped me so much in understanding John Wooden. In fact, I was working on a book and I needed to research it. I wanted to go to Indiana and see where John Wooden grew up and all the rest. And I told John Wooden, who was in Encino, California at the time, Coach, I'm going to Indiana. I'm going to talk to some people and, just sort of see where it was that you were raised and went to high school and college. And he said, when you go to Indiana, be sure you're going to South Bend and make sure you talk to Jim Powers. Don't come back here unless you talk to Jim Powers. Well, I hadn't heard of Jim Powers, but I made sure that I did see Jim Powers. And I will never forget the day that I was wending my way up from Indianapolis, and I went to Terre Haute, South Bend, and now I go to Marilyn and Jim's home, and they welcomed me in. Marilyn, as I recall, had some cookies there. We had a little coffee, and then Jim wanted to get to business. He took me back to the garage, and he had cardboard boxes, and he had photo albums and yearbooks. And it was really an education, a master's class in John Wooden. And the interesting thing for me was, right away, I felt that in talking with Jim Powers, I was talking with John Wooden. These fellows are cut from the same cloth. The qualities that are so powerful in men like Jim Powers and John Wooden, they exude strength, inner strength, not an arrogance, but an inner strength, a strength of character, and yet kindness. Now, they do it at the same time. Jim Powers was like that. You knew you were talking to a substantive person, and yet he had a great friendliness and neighborliness. And I immediately thought, boy, this is like talking with Coach Wooden. Well, we talked, I think, for 3 hours. I came back the next day, went through more cardboard boxes. He was showing me pictures and reminiscing. And I have a couple of them here that I found, and I'm not sure that Jim didn't give me these. These are photographs of what he was showing me. But here's a picture from the South Bend Central Bears. And I believe Jim is in the back, right behind Coach Wooden. And the other players are there. And to me, it's one of the best pictures I've ever seen of Coach Wooden, because he's surrounded by his players, guys who were on the team with Jim Powers, and the beautiful love that you can see. They've got their hand on Coach, and a young John Wooden is just beaming, surrounded by the love of his team. Well, then World War II came along. Coach Wooden enlisted, Jim Powers enlisted, and Jim Powers was almost killed, shot down, as I understand it, in a bombing raid over Italy. And when he got back to the United States after the war, things had moved along. John Wooden is now coaching at Indiana State Teachers College in Terre Haute, and he gets in touch with Jim Powers and says, why don't you come here to go to college? We'll just pick up where we left off, or something like that. Well, of course, this was an invitation that Jim Powers couldn't turn down. And several other of those South Bend players went to Indiana State to be with Coach Wooden again. Wow, what love they had for each other. Well, here's a picture from Indiana State Teachers College with Coach Wooden. Where is he? Coach Wooden is in the back. I don't know if you can see this on this little camera. Coach Wooden is up here, and Jim Powers is in there somewhere. I can't quite see it this on this screen, but he is one of the only players.
He's number 77.
Well, in the middle, right in the middle.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Well, he belongs in the middle of that group, and he's one of the few players that was coached by John Wooden in high school and in college. And he was there as John Wooden was evolving as a teacher. He knew John Wooden before John Wooden was John Wooden, the celebrity. And that to me made him a very special person, in addition to the man that he was. And he shared stories about John Wooden. And I was going through some files today. This is one I think that Jim gave me this story, but they're quoting, it's from the Indiana South Bend Tribune. And it says, guys like Jim Powers, South Bend Central. This was at a reunion. I was there, actually. I flew out with Coach Wooden and Mike, Mike's last name.
Warren.
I'm sorry, Mike Warren. And Jim Powers was there and others. But it says Jim Powers, and then it goes down the list, Lenny Rzuski and Subby Nowicki, and all of these guys that played for John Wooden. And then this quote. He says, at the time when we were playing, he was just coach, Powers remembered. Who also was Mike Warren's coach in high school. He was extremely friendly, family-oriented. Coach Wooden was the same at UCLA as he was in South Bend. He and his wife knew that I loved ice cream. And every time I went to visit, they had a gallon of vanilla ice cream waiting for me. So I guess that's part of coaching. You got to know your players. But I was struck so much by the death of John Wooden about 11 years ago. And now this, I think, for people that you really care about, even if you know they're in dire straits, and I did last week, you're surprised when they leave us. And the hole that comes is it's unexpected. You think, I knew he was dying. I knew John Wooden was dying, and yet it takes you by surprise, and it's a shock. And thinking about those two men, so alike. And as a matter of fact, John Wooden told me several times he would have been just as happy as a clam if he had stayed in Indiana and coached high school basketball like Jim Powers did. He knew that's when you can have the biggest impact on your student athletes and your kids. There's not all the falderall. That's what John Wooden called all the attention that he got. He hated that. He loved the players and he loved the competition, but he would have been just as happy staying at South Bend Central. But the war changed everybody's plans. But thinking about these two great people reminded me of a quote from Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, which, by the way, I got into Shakespeare because of John Wooden. And at the end of the play, Hamlet's dead. And his great friend and confidant, Horatio, says something to the effect that we will never see the likes of him again. And I thought that's true with John Wooden, it's true with Jim Powers. And then I thought, no, it's not true. They live on. They live on with the people that they taught. John Wooden's mentor at Purdue, Piggy Lambert, his coach, had this profound impact on him. John Wooden had this profound impact on Jim Powers. And Jim Powers had a profound impact, just like John Wooden, on his student athletes. And his kids teach the next generation and the next generation. They live on in their teachings. And John Wooden knew that. That's where he took his greatest pride, not in the trophies. And Jim Powers was the same way. Tom Brokaw wrote that book I know you're familiar with, The Greatest Generation. not to be flippant, if you want a poster boy for the greatest generation, Jim Powers, John Wooden, and men and women like them. They leave a hole, but it's one that the next generation and the generation steps up and fills. So I was lucky to know him, and I'm honored to be able to say a couple of words about this man who took me into his home, and then all the way along, he would supply newspaper clippings, or he might call me up and say, "Hey, I just remembered this story." A lot of it got into our books together. So my condolences to the family, and my best memories of Jim Powers, a great coach and a great teacher.
Thanks, Steve. Priceless. That's all I can say. So thank you so much for that. And lots of good material in their page for sure. And, I'd like to think that Paige is getting the output of these wise mentors, right, Paige? You're now Wooden's boy. As a girl, you're now Wooden's boy. And Paige is going to be married December the 18th of this year, and has got a wonderful young man that Coach Wooden would love. The fact that he's an Irish guy and a Catholic and comes from a great family, and he certainly would.
The pyramid of success above his desk at work.
there you go. So
that's a good sign.
Anyway,
that's a good sign. But anyway. Paige, you may know, or maybe you don't, that John Wooden, as he got older and as basketball changed, he much preferred women's basketball, watching women's basketball. He really did not like the showmanship and the grandstanding and the one me and the fancy stuff. He really loathed that. And he saw in women's basketball passing and assisting. Oh, that was the art of the game. And I thought he was kidding at first. When he made a kind of an offhanded statement, "Oh yeah, I'd much rather watch women's basketball, college basketball." And I said, "Yeah, right. And I made some joke." He said, "No, I'm serious." And then he explained his thinking, and I understand his point. They're both great. Here's a shot.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I'm not certain they talked about that, but that's funny, Paige, how that worked out, because one of my, dad got to know Muffet McGraw at Notre Dame, not super deep, but certainly met her on a handful of occasions. My dad ended up having season tickets to women's basketball at Notre Dame, but actually became quite close to Muffet's husband. So he would say the exact same thing, Steve. That's funny. Absolutely. The women's game, much more enjoyable to watch for Coach Powers. That's for sure.
Here's a picture too. I think your dad is in it, but this is one your dad may have given me this clipping.
Yeah, it looks familiar. Yep.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Well, yeah. Steve, thanks so much again. And, we'll treat this with the care and I guess diligence you'd expect us to, and use in a fashion that will certainly further his memory and, celebrate his life. So much fun.
Here's another one.
Yeah.
That's him over here.
Yeah, he's on the. I'm looking straight ahead, so he's the guy with his elbow on his knee and to the right of Coach Wooden in that picture. So yeah,
and that's the era that John Wooden. This was college, but that era in Indiana, he just loved what it was, and it's a completely pure experience. The whole.
I'm going to give you credit for everything that I read, whether you were the author or not. But I loved reading something in one of those books where Wooden, one of his greatest achievements that he would tell people was the fact that he won a state championship at Martinsville High School. UCLA was just icing on the cake. To win a state championship. And then again, you probably wrote this. One of his most extreme disappointments was when he didn't win the state championship and he had a chance to do something, hit a free throw or hit a last second shot, and he didn't. But there was a leadership lesson there. He didn't, mope. He didn't drop his head. His dad said, "Johnny, you did your best." And boy, he came back, I guess, the next year and won it. So boy, that was just a great story that of all the championships, there's not much more that he enjoyed than winning the Indiana's, IHSAA boys state championship when there was no, class basketball.
That's when the high school basketball in Indiana was Hoosiers style.
Right. Exactly.
He said it was actually too much excitement. He didn't like that excitement. He said there was too much. And at the games in Martinsville, they had often more people than they could fit into the gymnasium. That's how crazy popular it was. And when I went back there on my little tour of Indiana, I went to that high school, and they had over on the side the original, and still up there in the ceiling, the original scoreboard, which was antiquated. You could see it was almost, well, it was just really old and
sure.
And the guy said, "Yeah, that's the one that used to be there when Wooden played here." And I said, "What? That's the original? Where's the Hall of Fame? They should have this, He said, "I don't know. We moved it out of the way. Nobody could read it." So there it was. And I assume it's still there. But yes, that's part of his he drew lessons at every step of the way. You had me tell that little story about his mules and his dad coming over to talk to the mules. He drew lessons all the way through his life and kept them in mind for his own behavior, but also for his teaching. And the mule stories are good, all of them. I mean, they're just